let's go ahead and dive in. The first question is going to be kind of a rather general one of, when we're looking at all of these various regulations, whether it's the EPA regulations that I touched on this morning, the California regulations, and several of the states that are looking at banning internal combustion engine or limiting it in 2030, 2035, things like that. A lot of the commercial regulations that are coming out. How is that affecting your plans? And so Gil, as our lone entrant on the panel at an automaker, we're going to be most fascinated with how Hyundai is actually thinking about the impact of these regulations on what you bring to market and when.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah.
So,
and go ahead and introduce yourself as well. Yeah.
Gil Castillo, work at Hyundai Motor America, where I'm the Director for Regulatory Compliance.
Closer, yeah.
So your question, the rules and regulations that are coming out, certainly California's regulations and now the new EPA GHG proposal are certainly going to be extremely challenging for an automaker such as Hyundai. Now, I say that in light of the fact that Hyundai, as a kind of a traditional manufacturer, has been an early adopter and leader in kind of electrification, right? We had the Kona in 2017, we introduced the Ioniq 5 in 2021. Last year, we introduced several Genesis models, the G60, G70, GV60, GV70 SUVs, the G80. This year, we introduced the Ioniq 6 sedan, and then we've got very soon a 3-row mid-size SUV coming out, EV. Despite all this, when the new proposals came out, we looked at our lineup and realized that we actually have to accelerate our plan significantly more. Yeah. The proposals also make a significant reduction or require significant reduction in emissions of the conventional ICE models, right, internal combustion engines. And so where we thought that we could devote most of our development effort into battery electrics, now we're finding that we actually have to send back some of our engineering teams and shift some of that development manpower back to ICE.
And does that mean, just as a follow-up, does that mean maybe more investment in hybrids? Like, do you see potentially that most of your traditional ICE vehicles will just transition to being at minimum hybrids?
Yeah, the rules are designed in such a way that even the best fuel-efficient ICE models will not meet the minimum requirements. Right. I think by 2030, if not sooner. So hybridization is going to be mandatory, and it's not just mild hybrids. I think full hybrids are going to be a requirement.
Right. Gloria, let's go over to you. Obviously, at Caltrans, DOT, you're sort of interesting in that you're both sort of a government organization within the most progressive, and most regulatory-driven state probably there is, a country on the planet, if we think about California that way. But also, you're a fleet owner, right? You have lots of trucks, those white and orange trucks running around fixing the roads and stuff. So how are these regulations affecting how Caltrans is sort of navigating this transition to electrification?
So thank you for the question, Lauren.
And you can tell us who you are as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm Gloria Roberts. I'm the acting District 7 director for Caltrans. In District 7, we basically main and operate the state highway system within Los Angeles and Ventura counties. And so related to your question, Lauren, California is pretty unique in terms of, the California Air Resources Board, CARB, sets its own motor vehicle emission standards for the state. And so they basically set California up to kind of lead the nation in terms of really gearing towards 100% ZEV sales of new passenger vehicles by 2035. And so Caltrans, as a state agency, we are also very focused on meeting air quality and climate action goals. And so we do have a plan to transition our passenger and light duty fleet to 100% ZE by 2045.
2035?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, what about, just a quick follow-up to that, what about on sort of the commercial side, those like trucks and things like that? Are they in the same timeline, or are they different timeline?
They are in slightly different timeline, just given the technologies, but we do have, are working towards in our inventory having now battery electric street sweepers,
Yeah.
garbage trucks,
Yeah.
and also like large cargo vans. So that's certainly something that we're next pushing forward towards.
Yeah, and just like, we talked about wireless charging in Sandy's session and stuff, but a lot of those kind of vehicles could be perfect for wireless, right? Because they're stopping frequently and that type of thing. But kind of a follow-on, Richard, let's go to you on this one, and kind of sticking with kind of this commercial side of, first tell the audience who you are, but then let's talk about, and first maybe explain to the audience what some of these sort of commercial regulations are, because they're not necessarily, there's a lot of acronyms and the audience may not sort of be aware of all of them, but then secondly, how you see them impacting both, sort of the industry, the manufacturers, and sort of the fleets and buyers of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, Richard Colley. I'm the VP of Government Regulatory Affairs for RE Automotive. We're a new battery electric vehicle manufacturer focused on class 3 through 5. As Lauren said, there's two groundbreaking regulations in California. So the Advanced Clean Truck, or the ACT rule, was adopted in 2020. So this, similar to the ZEV mandate for passenger vehicles, requires manufacturers to now produce an increasing number of battery electric or zero-emission vehicles over the next 10 to 15 years. So this is now making sure that those models are available. Just a few weeks ago, CARB also adopted the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule, the ACF, and this sets targets for larger fleets and priority fleets to now transition their fleets into zero emission, again, over that similar timeline. So by the mid-2030s, truck manufacturers and commercial vehicle manufacturers are only going to be producing and selling EV trucks into California. And now the ACF is now going to drive that market for customers to then purchase those vehicles. So as a battery electric only manufacturer, this is now just going to be accelerating our business model over the next decade. So,
Gil, let's come back to you. We haven't forgotten you, Corey. We'll get to you next. But let's sort of follow up on that sort of initial question and coming back to the EPA targets and requirements of, like, how challenging is this actually going to be for, like, will you be able to meet those targets?
Yeah, the rules are going to be extremely challenging. And like I said, even for a company like Hyundai that's an early adopter and has already kind of maybe a head start versus some of our competitors. Really, the challenges are twofold. There's the technical development challenges, right? Needing to develop a number of additional BEV models, develop potentially additional platforms, because one platform can be used for a number of vehicles, but not for the entire fleet. There's also the localization efforts, right? Right now, in order to take advantage of some of the tax credits available through IRA, we have to localize. And we already have a plant that's all in U being developed in Georgia. It'll be open in 2025. That factory has about 500,000 unit capability annual, but that's probably not enough given some of the new challenges.
What's the sort of the current sales volume for Hyundai in the U.S.?
The current sales volume right now, I think we are about 800,000, 700,000 to 800,000.
Okay, yeah. So you're probably going to need if you want to sort of comply from a tax credit and other things like that, localization, you're probably going to have a second plant. Yeah.
Especially if you want to develop low-cost vehicles, then the tax credit becomes very, very important. And then, like I said, there's also the challenges of development manpower, since because the new rules make ICE vehicles much cleaner, right? There are a lot of requirements. There's going to be a lot more development required there, so there's that issue. But I think the biggest challenge really with the new proposed rules are not so much on the supply side, it's really on the demand side. The rules basically require roughly about, I think 36% EV penetration nationally by 27 model year, which is only 3 calendar years away, right? Right now, the US, like the first quarter, the average BEV penetration was about 7%, something like that. So you're going from 7% all the way to 36% in 3 years, right? And so the biggest concern is, and the stuff that keeps people like me up at night is not so much can we build the cars, it's will people buy the cars.
Demand? Yeah, great. Corey, let's go to you. This one is somebody that obviously is part of Monroe and stuff like that. You guys sort of, have a lot of relationships with the automakers and understand everything that goes into it. You tear things down. From kind of your perspective looking at this, how challenging is this going to be for the automakers to meet? Both, I think, as fascinating as Gil said, it's not just about EVs, it's about we have to continue to improve the efficiency of our gas-powered vehicles as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Corey Steuben, president of Monroe & Associates. That's a great question. So, Gil, you mentioned the technical challenge, and we look under the hood of dozens of EVs and really hundreds of vehicles over the past decade. And not all EVs are created equal. And that's really important when you're assessing the profitability that each OEM is trying to achieve. So the level of refinement when it comes to the integration of something like the thermal system, the high voltage electronics, these are the things that we uncover. And right now there's a vast difference between how traditional OEMs and some startups like Tesla and Lucid are approaching how vehicles are developed. And it actually extends into how the organizations are set up. Traditional OEMs will rely heavily on their suppliers to provide them commercial off-the-shelf components. But what that does is it diminishes the ability for the vehicle to achieve its peak MPGE. And why that's important is if you look at General Motors releasing the Hummer EV, it's very heavy and has a very poor MPGE. And is that really what the EPA and these regulations are trying to do?
Yeah.
So we assess all vehicles with a very unbiased method to assess how they're doing, the intricacies of their designs and their level of refinement. And I don't think we're even close to what the peak of what an EV can be. And these regulations, whether it's from the EPA or even tax credits, they put different types of pressures on the OEMs and the consumers as we push towards this transition. So Sandy Monroe, who's in the crowd right here, and myself, we have this really interesting perspective to be able to see this firsthand and help many of our clients, which are OEMs and suppliers, push forward.
Yeah. So I want to follow up. So this was not in the script, but I want to follow up on something you said, which is because I'm a big fan, and hopefully somebody will ask the EPA person at the end of the day this question. But I think you hit on a big point is while there's all this movement towards electrification, I think what's getting lost is efficiency, right? Is like we have EVs on the market that are, like under 2 kilowatt hours per mile, right? And we have ones that are over 4, right? But there isn't that same sort of MPG requirement that we have or that we think about. But am I inferring that you're thinking that we should be adding like efficiency to this, not just electrify, but we have to go beyond that. And just like with gas cars, we have to think about more efficient.
Yeah, something
EVs.
that has always kind of baffled me is that when people talk about EVs, they talk about range. But if you drove an internal combustion engine vehicle, you never talked about
range,
how many miles you had in a tank.
Right.
It was always MPG, miles per gallon.
Yeah.
So I think shifting the focus to MPGE really shows how hard that OEM is working to get the most efficiency out of their vehicle possible. And I think Hyundai is doing a great job. I think their Ioniq 5 was 10 or 15 MPGE lower than the new 6 that came out.
Yeah.
So you can see that improvement that these OEMs are making, and we need EVs that are ultra efficient, not just any EV.
Yeah. Gloria, it looked like you had a follow-up, or did anybody else want to follow up on the efficiency issue that might be missing from the regulations?
Yeah, I think it's hard to set specific efficiency standards because every architecture, every battery chemistry, vehicle is going to be different. But at least having transparency there, having standard ways to test so that you're comparing apples to apples between different EVs.
So Richard, let's stay with you and talk about. So we've talked about a lot of sort of the existing regulations that are out there and how they're affecting the automakers and fleets, et cetera. But are there regulations that are missing, right?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of areas here. So the first is we need to continue to invest in product development in the US and have not just the large OEMs, but also have these new phase of startups like Re-Automotive being able to innovate and have some of those same regulatory protections that the standard automakers are. So, for example, the ability to easily test our vehicles on public roads for demonstrations and mileage accumulation is very different between different size companies. Secondly, I think if we're going to hit the penetration rates and the sales volumes that we need to over the next decade, we need to make sure that vehicles can be sold in all ways. In California, it's very competition driven. You have OEMs and you have dealers and third parties selling vehicles. But that's not the same across most of the US, where in many states you can only purchase a vehicle through a dealer. And so we need to be moving towards, again, more of the California model, more of the competition rules, so that manufacturers, dealers, third parties can sell their vehicles to consumers.
So, Gil, let's follow up on that one with you, and I think we've got a sense of how you might think about this one, but are there changes that you would like to see in some of these revisions that maybe, to your point, sort of help meet in the middle between sort of supply and demand, and what's actually possible on this time frame?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of regulations, certainly everything's moving in one direction, right? So you've got California with its ACC2 regulations and ZEV mandate, which is a zero emission vehicle mandate, which is what, 35% in 26 model year. You've got the new EPA GHG rules. CAFE, NHTSA will come up with the new CAFE rules hopefully next month, and we expect them to be just as stringent. Right now, there's no harmonization between EPA and CARB, and so I don't know that I would certainly be up here saying we need more rules.
Right.
Hopefully there would be some harmonization between California and federal, and there are certainly things that can be done to reduce a lot of the development and testing requirements. Really, if we were to introduce or make recommendations, it's really more on the supply side, right? Yeah. You could make changes to, for example, require any new housing, commercial, public spaces to have level 2 charging as a requirement, right? You could also improve kind of some of the rules for publicly funded public charging so that there's better operability and reliability, right? Because that's one of the main concerns and issues that we see with people looking at EVs or actually own an EV. You could probably or possibly introduce a fee-based system, right, where you kind of penalize vehicles that are not very efficient or have low fuel economy, and incentivize those that are high efficiency EVs and such, like things like that. You could also potentially look at regulations to reduce the carbon intensity of the liquid fuels, right?
Right. Yep. Great. Gloria, let's sort of follow up on that and talk a bit about supply. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but as you know, I don't know how many trucks and vehicles there are in the Caltrans fleet, but I imagine tens of thousands. And so, are you actually going to be able to buy these, those dump trucks and things like that, right? Is ultimately, in your case, is the supply going to be sort of a big challenge?
Supply can definitely be a challenge, but just as Rich had mentioned about the ACT, where there is now regulation in terms of goals towards clean truck, more heavy-duty commercial drayage. So I'm very optimistic that definitely the technology would catch up. One of the things that we're also really looking at is improving the accessibility of infrastructure for the charging infrastructure, because in Los Angeles and Ventura counties, we have 3 ports. So definitely there's a lot of freight goods movement and drayage that we need to be concerned with. And so that's, we have a lot of state and federal programs that really help with, funding for companies and organizations to be able to move towards that transition.
Great. Corey, let's go to you on this one, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on this one, but talking about sort of the overlay between like our tax credits, our incentives, and sort of the profitability of automakers. Is like, how do these two things sort of intersect of how automakers sort of are approaching this?
Yeah. Making a profit selling electric vehicles is very hard. And that's indicated when we do our teardowns and cost analysis of these EVs. The costs rack up very quickly because of the battery technology, the thermal systems, the motors. They're really in their infancy when it comes to supply chains associated with that, sourcing strategies and whatnot. So I actually think that the tax credits bail out the OEMs. They take the pressure off of them from making a truly profitable vehicle without help. Now, will the OEMs pass that tax savings on to the consumer, or will they help them be slightly more profitable? And Tesla truly is the only automaker that I see with a large profit margin with their current business model, without a dealership network, without advertising, with a unique delivery model, and a high level of vertical integration that cuts out a lot of the profit margin from many of the tier 1s and tier 2s that other OEMs are saddled with through long-standing relationships. So in summary, I think OEMs should still strive to make EVs more affordable because it benefits everybody.
Yeah, great. We're almost out of time, but let's follow up with you. The question I think everybody would like to know, at least I know I would, around how do things, like to follow up on Corey's point, how do the available tax, and it's not just like the federal tax credits, a lot of the states have rebates, you can get rebates from utilities and things. How does an automaker factor in how they price an EV to the marketplace, accounting for all of those different incentives that might be available?
Well, when you look at the average consumer who may be considering an EV, they're not looking to pay a price premium. They're looking to have same as ICE range, 400 miles, right? They're looking for charging in minutes and not hours. And so right now, the average consumer who would be even considering an EV has somewhat unrealistic expectations, price being one of them. Right now, there is no price parity between battery electric and an ICE model, certainly at least not among the legacy manufacturers. And so these incentives are a necessary step to help grow the industry. Now, if we were happy with kind of the penetrations that we are looking at now, or a much slower ramp rate, then yeah, maybe these incentives wouldn't be as necessary, because you wouldn't want or need 60%, 70, 80% of the population to purchase these vehicles, right? Now, once there is price parity, and it'll come sooner or later, I can't predict when that is, because 2 years ago we would have said, oh, it's going to come mid this decade, but since then there's been a lot of changes, a lot of upheaval with battery minerals and things like that. Price parity could come much later in the decade, right? And so that means that if, again, getting not your early adopter, not your innovator who is willing to pay a price premium or who is all in on electric, but getting the consumer who is, I'd look at it, I'm more interested in a car first, and if it happens to be electric, that's great. Those are the consumers that you really need, right, to get mass adoption. These tax incentives then become or are still very, very important to try and convince them to get off that fence.
Yeah, great. Well, you're going to have the last word there, Gil. So I want to thank my great panel, Gil, Gloria, Corey, and Richard. And we will give them a big round of applause, and thank you, everyone.